Today we're tackling the biggest myths about flight school and becoming a pilot. If you've ever dreamed of flying but felt held back by things you've heard like you need eagle eye vision, you must be a math genius, or only the super rich can afford this, then this video is for you. We're going to debunk 8 common misconceptions that often keep aspiring aviators grounded. By the end, you'll have the real facts backed by data and expert insights, all delivered in a friendly, down-to-earth way. Whether you're an aviation enthusiast or just curious, stick around as we bust these myths one by one. Myth number 1, you need perfect vision to be a pilot. Many people think that pilots must have absolutely perfect 20/20 eyesight without any help. Basically, fighter pilot vision. If your eyes aren't perfect, you might assume your flying dreams are doomed. Here's the reality. Good news. Having naturally perfect eyesight is not a requirement to fly. What matters is that your vision can be corrected to the required standard. In fact, the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, allows pilots to fly as long as their vision is correctable to 20/20 with glasses or contact. In other words, you can wear prescription eyewear and still meet the vision requirements for your pilot's medical exam. One flight school resource explains it well. The FAA does not disqualify applicants whose vision does not correct naturally. They just require that it be correctable to the standard. That standard for most pilots' licenses is 20/20 distant vision and 20/40 for near vision, with or without correction. Even colorblindness isn't an automatic disqualifier. There are special tests and waivers that some colorblind pilots can obtain. What this means for you: plenty of pilots safely fly with glasses or contacts. Airline cockpits and flight schools are full of folks who don't have superhuman eyesight. They simply use the right corrective lenses. If you can read the instruments and see clearly with your prescription, then you're good to go. The key is passing the routine FAA medical exam. This is a test administered by an FAA aviation medical examiner, which checks that your vision, when corrected, if necessary, meets the standard. So don't let less than perfect eyesight clip your wings. Your dream of flying can absolutely stay in focus. Now that we've seen you don't need laser vision to be a pilot, let's tackle another intimidating myth. The one about brainy math skills. Myth number 2, you must be a math genius or a science whiz. Have you heard that becoming a pilot means doing super complex math like a human calculator or needing an advanced physics degree? This misconception scares off a lot of people. It's easy to imagine pilots crunching equations at 30,000 feet or solving physics puzzles before every landing. Here's the reality. You don't need to be a calculus genius or a physics PhD to succeed in flight training. Pilots do use math and science, but it's mostly basic practical math. Think simple arithmetic and understanding concepts that you likely learned in high school. One flight academy put it clearly: while aviation involves some calculations such as speed, fuel burn, distance, complex math or science is very rarely required. You'll primarily use addition, subtraction, basic geometry while you're reading maps or navigation charts, and the occasional multiplication or division for things like fuel usage or weight and balance. And guess what? You'll have tools like calculators, flight planning apps, and onboard computers to help with that. It's not about solving algebraic equations from memory while flying. Flight schools know students come from all sorts of academic backgrounds. Good instructors will teach you these specific formulas or techniques that you need, step by step. For example, you might need to learn how to calculate your plane's range or estimate a wind correction angle, but these come with practice and often handy rules of thumbs. As Paris Air's instructor notes, they focus on essential flying skills and simply the math involved, making it accessible for all backgrounds. In short, being bad at math is not a deal breaker. If you can handle basic numbers and are willing to learn, you can master the calculations needed to fly. So don't let those equations on the flight exam study guide scare you. It's far more down to earth than it looks, and you'll get plenty of guidance. Alright, so far so good. You don't need telescopic vision or Einstein's math skills, but what about the money side of things? Many people think that pilot training is only for the wealthy. We're going to talk about that now. Myth number 3, flight training is unaffordable and only rich people can become pilots. I'd love to be a pilot, but I heard it costs a fortune. This is an incredibly common worry. It's true that learning to fly is not cheap. Aircraft, fuel, instructors, and exams all cost money, and many imagine only millionaires or trust fund kids can foot the bill for flight school. The myth is that unless you have very deep pockets, don't even bother considering aviation. Yes, flight training is a significant investment, but it's not only for the ultra-rich, and there are many ways to make it affordable. The notion that only the rich can access aviation is simply a misconception. Students from all kinds of economic backgrounds become pilots. How? For one, there are multiple pathways and financial options to manage the costs. Here are a few key points that debunk the unaffordable myth. Pay-as-you-go and financing. Most flight schools allow pay per lesson or pay-as-you-go plans, so you don't have to shell out the whole upfront cost. You can spread training over time as your budget allows. There are also loans specifically for pilot training. Think of it like paying college tuition. Many people finance it and pay it off gradually once they start earning as pilots. Scholarships and grants. A lot of aviation organizations and schools offer scholarships, grants, or sponsorships for student pilots. For example, some airlines and flight academies have scholarship programs or even fully funded training slots each year for aspiring pilots who qualify. It's worth researching programs from groups like Women in Aviation, AOPA, EAA, or local aviation clubs. There's quite a bit of free money out there for motivated students. Airline cadet programs. In some cases, airlines themselves partner with flight schools to create cadet programs. These can include tuition assistance or agreements where the airline covers some training costs in exchange for you to work for them for a set amount of time after. Similarly, in the military, if you choose that route, the government funds your training in return for service. But even in the civilian world, some carriers will invest in pilots training due to the long-term pilot shortage. Career payoff. While this isn't immediate help, remember that pilots earn good salaries once they reach certain levels. So the training is an investment in a high-paying career. Many pilots pay off their training costs within a few years of working, and if you're not after a career, just a private pilot's license for personal flying, the cost is comparable to, say, buying a decent used car. Significant, yes, but not impossibly out of reach with savings and a budget. A UK flight academy put it very nicely. While flight training does involve a significant investment, and there are multiple pathways and opportunities to make it achievable. So don't assume that you need to be a billionaire to fly. Many ordinary folks become pilots by combining resources, a bit of savings, perhaps a part-time job while training, maybe a small loan or scholarship help, etc. Some even earn as they learn. For instance, after getting initial licenses, you can work as a flight instructor to build hours and get paid, which offsets further training costs. In short, yes, flying will cost some money, but it's not an exclusive club for the rich. With proper planning, financial help, and determination, the sky can be within your budget's reach. Money isn't the only gatekeeper myth out there. What if you think you've missed the boat because of your age? Let's talk about the idea that you must start flying young. Myth number 4. Only the young can learn to fly. I'm too old to start. If you didn't start flying by the time you could drive, forget it. Here's the myth. There's a persistent belief that learning to fly is only for teenagers or 20-something-year-olds. Many people in their 30s, 40s, or beyond assume it's too late for them to go to flight school. They picture airline captains who all started in college or former fighter pilots who began at 18 and think an older newcomer wouldn't stand a chance. The reality? There is no upper age limit for learning to fly. Truly. Whether you're 16 or 60, if you have the passion and health to pass a basic medical exam, you can become a pilot. As one flight training center explains, there is no maximum age limit for learning to fly. Your age is less important than your passion and commitment to learning. In fact, life experiences and maturity can be assets in flight training. Older students often bring discipline, focus, and good decision-making skills honed over the years. There are countless examples of people who started flight training later in life and succeeded. Consider this. The oldest person to ever obtain a pilot's license was 87 years old. Yes, you heard that right. At 87 years old, a retired U.S. Air Force colonel fulfilled his lifelong dream and earned his pilot's certificate. If 87 isn't too old, chances are you aren't either. Now, it's true that if your goal is an airline career, starting in your late 50s or 60s could be impractical because in many countries, airline pilots face mandatory retirements by age 65. Even then, you could still fly recreationally or get other pilot certificates just for fun or be an instructor. And if you're in your 30s or 40s aiming for a new career, that's absolutely doable. Plenty of people have switched to aviation midlife. The timeline to train isn't as long as many think. With full-time dedication, you can go from zero experience to a commercial pilot's license in as little as 18 months. Even part-time, you might get there in a few years. So starting at 35 or 45 could still land you in an airline cockpit well before the mandatory retirement age. Don't let "I'm too old" be an excuse that grounds you. If you're healthy and motivated, flight instructors will welcome you just as warmly as any younger student. In flying, enthusiasm and attitude matter more than the birth date on your ID. As long as you can commit to training and keep learning, the sky doesn't care about your age. Many older pilots say learning to fly later in life is incredibly rewarding. It proves that age is just a number when it comes to pursuing your dreams. I actually have an entire course down below that will walk you through every single step of how to change careers and become an airline pilot. If that's something that interests you, I'm currently doing 50% off until the end of the month of September. Check it out down below. We've covered vision, brains, money, and age all big barriers in people's minds. Now let's address a fear factor myth. Is flying itself just too dangerous to even try? Myth number 5. Flying and flight training is extremely dangerous. For some, the thought of sitting in a small training airplane thousands of feet up is terrifying. Headlines about plane crashes, even though they're rare, stick in people's minds. This myth says that learning to fly is a high-risk, daredevil activity, far more dangerous than ordinary life on the ground. Aren't small planes dangerous? Is a question I hear all the time. What if the engine stops? Isn't flying just inherently dangerous? Well, here's the reality. Flying, especially when done by the book in training, is actually very safe. In fact, statistically, it's among one of the safest modes of transportation. Are you surprised? It's true. Thanks to rigorous training, strict regulations, and modern technology, the safety record of aviation is excellent. Let's put it in perspective. Every day, tens of thousands of flights, from jumbo jets to little Cessna trainers, take off and land without incident. Year over year, commercial air travel has fewer accidents per mile than car travel. And in training, you're usually flying with a very well-maintained aircraft and a certified instructor who's prepared for any situation. One flight academy emphasizes that flying might seem risky, but statistically it's among the safest modes of transportation thanks to the rigorous training and safety protocols followed by pilots. Pilots, even student pilots, are drilled in emergency procedures and taught to respect weather, maintenance, and operating limits. Airplanes undergo regular inspections. For example, training planes in the US often get thoroughly safety inspected every 100 hours of flight time. And unlike driving a car, there's no such thing as a random stoplight in the sky. A lot of the unpredictabilities of ground travel simply don't exist up there. It's normal to feel some nerves about flying. Even student pilots do it first. But part of training is building confidence through knowledge. You'll learn how the engine works, what to do if something goes wrong, how to glide and land safely even without power, and so on. Think of it like this. By the time you solo or carry passengers, you'll have practiced so many safety scenarios that you're actually far more prepared for what-ifs than the average car driver on the road. With the right training, flying can be even safer than driving a car. So don't let fear-mongering myths ground you. Flying isn't about cheating death. It's about mastering a well-regulated, methodical skill under the guidance of professionals. Safety is the number one priority in aviation training, always. Once you understand that, you'll see that the danger stereotype is overblown. So take a deep breath, trust the process, and enjoy the ride. Feeling better about safety? Great. Now another myth often comes from comparing yourself to military fighter pilots. Let's debunk the idea that you must have a military background to become a pilot. Myth number 6, you have to be a military pilot first. Civilian training isn't enough. Here's the myth. This one's a throwback to earlier generations. The only real path to an airline cockpit is through the military. People imagine that to become a professional pilot, you have to join the Air Force or Navy, fly jets, then later transition to the airlines. It's easy to see why. Because for decades, especially in the mid-20th century, many airline pilots were indeed ex-military. This myth suggests that if you don't wear a uniform and salute, you can't be a top-tier pilot. Times have changed. While the military is one path to a flying career, it's by no means the only path. In fact, most pilots today come up through civilian flight schools. You absolutely do not need to join the armed forces to learn to fly to be hired at an airline. Commercial airlines hire thousands of pilots who never served a day in the military in their life. In recent years, it's estimated that only about 1/3 of airline pilots have military backgrounds, meaning that the majority are civilians who went through civilian training programs. The civilian route is not only valid, in some ways it's more direct and flexible for many people. Here's how the civilian path works. You enroll in a civilian flight school or aviation college, earn your licenses and ratings, private pilot, instrument, commercial, etc. You build your hours, often by instructing or doing other jobs, and ultimately earn an airline transport pilot certificate, which is required to be an airline pilot. The key hiring requirement for airlines is typically 1,500 flight hours and the ATP certification, which you can get entirely through civilian flying. No military experience required, just the dedication to log those hours and gain experience. In fact, one aviation career expert notes that going civilian can actually get you to an airline faster than the military route. If your goal is to become an airline pilot, civilian aviation has the potential to get you there a lot quicker than the military. All it takes to get hired at a regional airline these days is an ATP certificate and a good resume. The military, by contrast, might require a 10-year service commitment before you can move on, so a civilian could be flying for an airline years sooner in some cases. Here's the bottom line. Unless you specifically want a military career, you can become a pilot completely in the civilian world. There are hundreds of civilian flight schools, university aviation programs, and instructor academies that produce excellent pilots. Airlines value military experience, yes, but but they just as eagerly hire civilian trained pilots because the FAA licensing standards are the same for everyone. So don't think you're less legitimate if you don't have a fighter jet pedigree. What matters are your skills, training, and flight hours, not the branch of service on your resume. If the military route appeals to you for other reasons, like serving your country or flying high-performance jets, that's great. But if not, no worries, you can start at your local airport's flight school and end up in the captain's seat just the same. The sky doesn't distinguish between military and civilian pilots, and neither do the airlines. Speaking of resumes, what about formal education? Let's clear up confusion around college degrees and piloting. Myth number 7, pilots need a college degree in aviation or a 4-year degree at a minimum. Many people assume that to even begin pilot training or certainly to get a job as an airline pilot, you must have a college degree, preferably in aviation or aerospace engineering or something related. The image is that airlines only hire university-educated pilots and that flight schools might require you to have a degree or high-level academic. This myth can discourage those who either didn't go to college or studied an unrelated field. Here's the reality. You don't need a college degree to become a pilot or even to fly for an airline, though for years it was definitely a preference. The core requirements to be a pilot are set by the aviation authorities, like the FAA in the US, and they center on flight training and certifications, not having a bachelor's degree. To start flight training, a lot of schools might require you to have a high school diploma or equivalent, but honestly, at the local airport down the street, you probably don't even need that. As one pilot training program notes, becoming a pilot doesn't require a degree. A strong foundation in basic math, English, and science helps, but you don't need a college graduation cap. Many successful pilots come from a huge range of educational backgrounds, some straight out of high school, some after careers in totally different fields. What matters is passing your pilot exams and check rides, not writing term papers or doing college labs. Now, it is true that in the past, major airlines often preferred or even required a 4-year college degree for pilot applicants. This was more of an HR filter than a regulatory one. However, that has been changing. For example, Delta Airlines, one of the largest carriers, announced in 2022 that a 4-year college degree is no longer an absolute requirement, but rather just a preferred qualification for pilot hiring. In their words, they removed the degree requirement to avoid unintentional barriers and recognize that many candidates gain equivalent experience outside of college. Other major airlines have made similar moves, especially amid the pilot shortage. They don't want to turn away good pilots just because they didn't take History 101 in college. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics now notes that airline pilots typically need a bachelor's degree or military experience, but it's definitely not universal, and many regional airlines hire without a degree if you have the flight creds. Also, the degree, if you have one, doesn't necessarily need to be in aviation. Plenty of pilots studied completely unrelated subjects, business, English, engineering, you name it, and then pursued flying separately. Airlines value the discipline a degree shows, but they don't require it to be aviation specific. And for flying corporate or chartered, the client cares about your piloting skills, not your college GPA. To sum it up, if you have a college degree, fantastic. It might give you more options or a backup plan, and it could help with career advancement or certain countries' airline hiring. But it's not a strict prerequisite to becoming a pilot. You can walk into a flight school without a college diploma and still end up a licensed commercial pilot if you put in the effort. Focus on acing your flight training and knowledge exams. That's the education that counts the most towards being a pilot. All right, we've got one more big myth to go, and it's an important one about who can become a pilot. Let's address the stereotype that has lingered for way too long. Myth number 8, it's a male-dominated field and only men can become pilot. When you think a pilot, do you picture a man? Because many people do. Because historically, the vast majority of pilots have been men. This has led to the misconception, sometimes voiced outright, sometimes just internalized, that piloting is a dude thing. That women, for instance, either can't be pilots or will have a very hard time in a supposed boys' club. This myth can discourage women and girls from pursuing aviation, and it can also give the general public the false idea that female pilots are extremely rare or less capable. Here's the reality. Piloting is not an exclusively male domain. Anyone, regardless of gender, can become a successful pilot, and the industry is actively working to broaden diversity. It's true that the field has been male-dominated for a very long time. Even today, women make up only a small percentage of pilots. For example, worldwide estimates put female pilots roughly at 5 to 6% of the total, and in the US, about 7% of all certified pilots are women. Those numbers are growing, but yes, men are still the large majority. However, that is changing fast. The notion that only men can be pilots is completely outdated and untrue. There are thousands of female pilots, airline airline captains, fighter pilots, flight instructors, helicopter pilots, you name it, proving every day that the cockpit is not a boys-only club. Airlines and flight schools are actively encouraging more women to join the ranks. There are plenty of organizations that provide support, scholarships, and mentorship for women in aviation. There's absolutely no inherent reason why women can't be pilots. Flying an aircraft is about training, knowledge, decision-making, and passion, none of which are gender-specific traits. The macho pilot image is fading. These days, you'll find female pilots flying jumbo jets internationally, commanding military squadrons, running flight schools, and performing at air shows. The industry wants more women in the cockpit, and passengers are increasingly accustomed to hearing a woman's voice say, "This is your captain speaking," over the PA. So if you're a woman or a girl who's dreaming of flying, don't let the stats intimidate you. You might still be in the minority, but you're highly welcomed and there's a big community ready to support you. And for the viewers in general, take this as a lesson that anyone can fly if they have the drive. Gender, ethnicity, or background should not be barriers. The sky doesn't care who you are as long as you can aviate, navigate, and communicate. We've just navigated through some of the biggest myths about flight training, and as you can see, none of them hold water. You don't need superhero vision, genius level math, a gold-plated bank account, or specific demographic profile to become a pilot. What you do need is interest, willingness to learn, and determination to see it through. Becoming a pilot, whether for a career or just for fun, is far more attainable than many people think once these misconceptions are cleared away. If watching this has reignited your aviation ambitions, why not take the next step? Maybe schedule a discovery flight at a local airport, a simple introductory flight lesson to see what it's actually like. Chances are you'll walk away even more enthusiastic and you'll realize that those scary myths we talked about were just clouds obstructing a clear view of your goal. Remember, every seasoned pilot was once a beginner with doubts and fears, but they pressed on and learned the truth. Flying is possible for those who go for it. Thank you for joining us in this week's episode. If you found this video helpful, please do me a big favor and hit the like button. YouTube's going to ask you if you want to hype the video. Please consider doing that. It tells YouTube to really push this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That's all I got for you. I'll see you guys next week.